All right. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. How's everybody doing? I am happy to finally be kicking off the inaugural stream for the Appendix N book club. I need some kind of fanfare for that. Hopefully everyone's done their reading, and if not, it's no big deal. I'm going to try to do, reading, and then kind of we could talk about it and sort of as we go. Not sure how long it will take. How many streams that will encompass, we'll just play it by ear. I thought before maybe we get into the story itself, we could do a little bit of background on the dying Earth. I've picked up, as usual, the internet authority on such things, Wikipedia. Wikipedia proclaims The Dying Earth is a fantasy series by the American author Jack Vance, comprising 4 books originally published from 1950 to 1984. Some have been called picaresque. We are doing the first book, which is the first book in the series, The Dying Earth, and is ranked number 16 on the all-time best fantasy novels by Locus Magazine in 1987. Does that even, does that still exist? So the setting of these stories, of which the one we're going over tonight, or today, why did I say tonight? Turjan of Miir is the first. I think it depends also on the printing. I know I said it's the first, but I think sometimes it's the Kindle copy, which you'll see, Turjan's actually the second story, and Miirian the Magician is the first story. We'll probably just do Miirian next on the list. But I think the way I was doing this is when they were first published, Turjan was the first story, I think. About the setting, the stories of the Dying Earth series are set in the distant future at a point when the sun is almost exhausted and magic has asserted itself as a dominant force. The moon has disappeared and the sun is in danger of burning out at any time, often flickering as if about to go out, before shining again. The various civilizations of Earth have collapsed for the most part into decadence or religious fanaticism, and its inhabitants overcome with a fatalistic outlook. The Earth is mostly barren and cold and has become infested with various predatory monsters, possibly created by a magician in a former age. Of course, from a D&D perspective, a role-playing perspective, an OSR perspective, probably the most famous part of this is the Vancian magic system, which has come down through D&D into, tabletop role-playing lore, which was this concept of memorizing magic spells. Wikipedia says magic in the Dying Earth is performed by memorizing syllables, and the human brain can only accommodate a certain number at once. When a spell is used, the syllables vanish from the caster's mind. Creatures called Sandestins can be summoned and used to perform more complex actions, but are considered dangerous to rely upon. Magic has loose links to the science of old, and advanced mathematics is treated like arcane lore. Paul Drury says, excellent story. It is. It is indeed. Okay. So there's a little bit about the setting, courtesy of Wikipedia. Whoops. Origins. Vance wrote the stories of the first book while he served in the United States Merchant Marine during World War II. It's interesting that a lot of these stories by different authors were written kind of during times of war. I don't know if that means something or not. The Dying Earth, which is the book in which we are in, of which this is story number 1, was published in 1950. And then we get some other ones. See, here's where I got Turjan of Miir, at least originally was first on the list of the Dying Earth. The Dying Earth stories, Turjan of Miir, Miirian the Magician, Sais, Lian the Wayfarer, Ulandor Ends a Dream, and Guyal of Sefer. Then they go into other stuff, which we don't need to get in at the moment. Magic is esoteric, Paul says. Yes, indeed. And that's something that, I don't know if it's lost, but the concept of what magic is has definitely changed over time in terms of how it exists in most fantasy worlds. I think a lot of us who came up with the OSR when it wasn't the OSR, when it was new SR. Oops, I'm opening a can of soda, trying to keep the sound away. Magic, I think, to older folks who maybe came up in the 70s or 80s had definitely had a different vibe to it than I think the magic that folks who came up later had. And I think that not just Harry Potter, but Harry Potter and probably a lot of other stories. I don't know about magic and stuff like the Golden Compass and a lot of these other books, but in say Harry Potter, magic is very much not unusual, at least in the world of wizards. Maybe I suppose if you're a muggle, it might seem it's almost like magic in kind of your D&D classic D&D game is if comes from the perspective of the muggles who's from whom the wizarding world is hidden. Right? They'll see some spell go off, and of course it's what it would be like in our world if suddenly a spell went off. We'd just be like, holy cow, running for cover, crying, pooping one's pants, all that sort of thing. Very highly unusual. Whereas in the perspective of the wizard's world, people are just shooting magic all over the place. I mean, they're giving kids time machine artifacts, for goodness sake. So it's very much commonplace. But these stories definitely harken back to what I recall of magic as being hard, esoteric, weird, something not to be trusted, something difficult to pull off, those kinds of things. So it's definitely interesting, and it's been interesting watching how games like D&D and other things have moved from one version of magic to another. Bandits Keep, hey, how you doing? Daniel says love some Vancian magic. Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. It's one of those things where I think people, say, "Oh, I hate it. It doesn't make any sense." Well, no, I mean, if you look at magic a certain way, it makes sense. If you look at another way, it doesn't make sense. It's all about kind of how you envision magic. Now, Nothing says, "Hey, Nothing. I was surprised how natural the Vancian magic worked in a narrative." Yes, absolutely. It does work, and it does it gives him some interesting things to be able to do because you can limit it. In something like Harry Potter, when you can just keep casting a spell, the challenges have to come from different places. Whatever obstacles, it can't just be just the spell being cast. I mean, for Harry Potter and some of the early films, it is that because they don't know the spells very well. So casting a simple spell can itself be a challenge. Wingardium Leviosa. And if only Hermione can do it, then if Harry needs to do it at some point, that kind of becomes a challenge. Or doing that in the third movie, he does there's something else he does, some kind of defensive magic, and that is a kind of a challenge because he's just been practicing the spell and barely knows it. But at a certain point, being able to pew pew with your wand kind of isn't the challenge. It's kind of other things. Whereas with kind of Vancian magic, there's a lot of different stuff going on. Hey, Perkins says working but listening. Love this topic. Awesome. Bandits Keep. Daniel says I like the way spells are something you need to carry or equip. Yeah, I always like that part of the magic user, which was that kind of mini game of have I prepped the right spells? When you do it right, you feel amazing. When you do it wrong, you get bummed out. But there was a challenge there, and it's interesting because I think a lot of players now, that's just not a challenge they want, which I get. Right, back in the day, you didn't have a choice. If I was a kid when I first came to D&D, and it would have been like, well, I don't like that. Well, it's like, well, no other way to do it, really. That's it. I mean, I'm sure there were, even at the time in the early 80s, there were other RPGs, but I just wasn't aware of them. So it was kind of like, well, this is how the game works. We're going to figure out how to make it work for us. But then I think at some point you embrace that challenge of, oh, this is what I got to do. I got to figure out, am I going to need this or am I going to need that? What can I do? And what do the rest of my team have going on? And kind of do that to match. And when you nail it, when you kind of end up out of your time in the dungeon, you go back to rest and you're looking at it and you're like, I used every spell that I'd memorized and I got it right every time and it was useful. It is kind of it is like a good feeling of that you just don't have when you can just do whatever you want. But I understand if people don't love it. So this is, again, in my copy, this comes up as chapter 2 or story 2, because mine is if I'm reading it from the Kindle. They had previously, it was first originally called The Dying Earth, and then they renamed it sometime later. I think in the 80s, they renamed it as Misery and the Magician, and I guess they must have reshuffled the stories about a little bit, because Turjan of Miir goes from the first story of the book to story 2. I'm going to start reading, and then we'll just hop in and discuss as things come up. I guess in case the copyright police, I am reading this under fair use for analytical purposes. Any entertainment anyone gets from this is wholly unexpected and accidental. With that out of the way, Jack Vance, Turjan of Miir. Turjan sat in his workroom, legs sprawled out from the stool, back against and elbows on the bench. Across the room was a cage. Into this Turjan gazed with rueful vexation. The creature in the cage returned the scrutiny with emotions beyond conjecture. It was a thing to arouse pity. A great head on a small, spindly body, with weak, rheumy eyes and the flabby button of a nose. The mouse hung slackly wet. The skin glistened waxy pink. In spite of its manifest imperfection, it was to date the most successful product of Turjan's Vance. Notice that I highlighted this whole thing. I'm not even sure what I loved about. I mean, I always love these kind of descriptions. It's both kind of disgusting and pitiful and sad, and then there's this irony there, because as pitiful and sad and disgusting as this thing is, it's the most successful thing he's been able to do with whatever these things, these vats that he has, whatever they look like. Paul Drury says, in a novel, advancing magic is not so much a gamist or simulation, it's more narrativist approach. Yep. Turjan stood up, found a bowl of pap. With a long-handled spoon, he held food to the creature's mouth, but the mouth refused the spoon, and mush trickled down the glazed skin to fall on the rickety frame. Turjan put down the bowl, stood back, and slowly returned to his stool. For a week now, it had refused to eat. Did the idiotic visage conceal perception, a will to extinction? As Turjan watched, the white-blue eyes closed, the great head slumped and bumped to the floor of the cage. The limbs relaxed. The creature was dead. Turjan sighed and left the room. He mounted winding stone stairs and at last came on the roof of his castle Miir, high above the river Durna. In the west, the sun hung close to old earth. Ruby shafts, heavy and rich as wine, slanted past the gnarled boles of the archaic forest to lay on the turfed forest floor. The sun sank in accordance with the old ritual. Latter-day night fell across the forest. A soft, warm darkness came swiftly, and Turjan stood pondering the death of his latest creature. Vivomancy, Paul Drury says. Daniel says, he equips one spell he never gets a chance to use, Spell of the Slow Hour. That's very true. We'll get to the spells. I love the spell names here. I know someone has made an OSR list. If I can dig it up, I'll post it on the forums of I don't know if they're all the spells from Dying Earth, various Dying Earth stories, or they came up with a list of these sound kind of Dying Earth names. Some of them came almost right into D&D. I think Prismatic Spray, was it that the most excellent Prismatic Spray, I think it's called? And then other ones less so, but they're great names. He considered its many precursors, the things all eyes, the boneless creatures with the pulsing surface of its brain exposed, the beautiful female body whose intestines trailed out into the nutrient solution like seeking fibrils, the inverted inside-out creatures. Turjan sighed bleakly. His methods were at fault. A fundamental element was lacking from his synthesis, a matrix ordering the components of the pattern. As he sat gazing across the darkened land, memory took Turjan to a night of years before, when the sage had stood behind him. In ages gone, the sage had said, his eyes fixed on a low star, 1,000 spells were known to sorcery, and the wizards affected their wills. Today, as earth dies, 100 spells remain to man's knowledge, and these have come to us through the ancient books. But there is one called Pandalume, who knows all the spells, all the incantations, cantraps, runes, and thaumaturgies that have ever wrenched and molded space. He had fallen silent, lost in his thoughts. Where is this Pandalume? Turjan had asked presently. He dwells in the land of Embellion, the sage had replied. But where this land lies, no one knows. How does one find Pandalume, then? The sage smiled faintly. If it were ever necessary, a spell exists to take one there. Both had been silent a moment. Then the sage had spoken, staring out over the forest. One may ask anything of Pandalume, and Pandalume will answer, provided that the seeker performs the service Pandalume requires. And Pandalume drives a hard bargain. Then the sage had shown Turjan the spell in question, which he had discovered in an ancient portfolio and kept secret from all the world. Turjan, remembering this conversation, descended to his study, a long low hall with stone walls and stone floor deadened by a thick russet rug. The tomes which held Turjan's sorcery lay on the long table of black skeel, or were thrust helter-skelter into shelves. These were volumes compiled by many wizards of the past, untidy folios collected by the sage, leather-bound librams setting forth the syllables of 100 powerful spells, so cogent that Turjan's brain could know but 4 at a time. Turjan found a musty portfolio, turned the heavy pages to the spell the sage had shown him, the call to the violent cloud. He stared down at the characters, and they burned with an urgent power, pressing off the page as if frantic to leave the dark solitude of the book. Turjan closed the book, forcing the spell back into oblivion. All right, so there's a bunch of stuff I love in here. Let me see what the chat's got going. Nothing says. I think it's interesting how little they go into his motivation compared to other stories about the quest to create life. like Frankenstein. Yeah, I think they kind of hint at it that he's, that life is, the earth is dying and that he's trying to kind of create life, but that obviously he's missing something. He doesn't have maybe he's not showing the passion or fervor of someone like Dr. Frankenstein for sure. Let's see. Daniel says Gavin Norman created the complete Vivimancer, pretty interesting supplement. Oh, I haven't read that, but that is interesting. So I love the idea here that the D&D they kind of lost this, and I don't know if it would have made a difference in the way people perceive of Vancian casting in D&D, but when he talks about that, how powerful these different syllables are, that you can only hold 4 because of the just, I don't know, the immenseness of it. That doesn't really get, maybe because of many spells in D&D and they're not all super powerful, then it kind of devalues this concept of the memorization part. So you get something like Prismatic Spray, even in D&D, I think it's some kind of mid-level spell. I forget exactly what level it is, but it's definitely not a low-level spell, unless I'm totally off my memory. So it makes sense that something like that is powerful. But then you might look at a first-level spell and you think, well, is it really that powerful? Like, what is it doing? Maybe to do that, or at least I could see that disconnect happening in players' minds. The other part is this description of the spell on the page. The characters burned with an urgent power, pressing off the page as if frantic to leave. I mean, that's a really active power that you don't get generally, that feeling from in scrolls and things like that the spells want to burst into being. That definitely gives it a much more, it takes it from something very static and like, oh, look, here's another scroll, to like, no, this scroll, it's like a pulsing, almost living thing. It's been imbued with this crazy energy that wants to escape. It's kind of been trapped in the letters. Paul Drury says Vivimancy is not one of the D&D schools. No, I don't recall it, but the name sounds familiar. But yeah, I would be down. I mean, I don't know what would I can't ever remember the whole schools of D&D. I'm not even sure where Vivimancy would sit in terms of the classic. And when did the classic schools of magic, like Abjuration and Evocation, when did those? I don't remember what edition they popped into. He robed himself with a short blue cape, tucked a blade into his belt, fitted the amulet holding Lacodel's rune to his wrist. Then he sat down and from a journal chose the spells he would take with him. What dangers he might meet he could not know, so he selected 3 spells of general application: the excellent Prismatic Spray, Fandal's Mantle of Stealth, and the spell of the Slow Hour. So as Daniel mentioned, he never ends up using the spell of the Slow Hour. I don't remember if he says what that is. Mantle of Stealth is pretty obvious, and of course we all know Prismatic Spray. Or maybe I shouldn't say we all know, but it's a pretty famous spell in and outside of D&D. He climbed the parapets of his castle and stood under the far stars, breathing the air of ancient earth. How many times had this air been breathed before him? What cries of pain had this air experienced? What sighs, laughs, war shouts, cries of exultation, gasps? The night was wearing on. A blue light wavered in the forest. Turjan watched a moment, then at last squared himself and uttered the call to the violent cloud. All was quiet. Then came a whisper of movement swelling to the roar of great winds. A wisp of white appeared and waxed to a pillar of boiling black smoke. A voice deep and harsh issued from the turbulence. At your disturbing power is this instrument come. Whence will you go? 4 directions, then 1, said Turjan. Alive must I be brought to Embellion. The cloud whirled down. Far up and away he was snatched, flung head over heels into incalculable distance. 4 directions was he thrust, then 1, and at last a great blow hurled him from the cloud, sprawled him into Embellion. Well, I just want to pause here. Again, you think about the kind of things that tend to get lost and when we go from something in the fiction to, in the game, but these wonderful descriptions and the way the spells work, you go from, essentially it's a teleport type spell or some kind of vast distance travel spell. But teleport feels very, almost sterile compared to this cloud coming down, whisking you away. And then I guess the interesting thing is the 4 directions, then 1. It feels, there's a ritual here where you have to let the thing just whip you around in different directions before finally you get to be thrown in the one you want. I wonder if something awful would happen if you forgot to let it do that. If you just said, "Take me to Embellion," what would happen to it? But I love that you get that little ritual. And it would be interesting. I wonder if there'd be ways to game that. I don't know, because I get from a player's perspective, even from a GM's perspective, if you were going to have these kind of rituals to go along with each spell, you have to remember them. The player's got to remember them. I don't know if it makes sense in terms of running it as a game, but it would be interesting to go back through some of the spells, or even just new spells, whatever, and give them these really kind of interesting, colorful flavors, as opposed to just, I don't know, you blip out of existence in one spot and you blip into something else. That has that very kind of sci-fi teleport, whereas what's it called? Call to the Violent Cloud feels very, very fantastic. Turjan gained his feet and tottered a moment, half dazed. His senses steadied. He looked about him. He stood on the bank of a limpid pool. Blue flowers grew about his ankles, and at his back reared a grove of tall blue-green trees, the leaves blurring on high into mist. Was Embellion of earth? The trees were earth-like. The flowers were of familiar form. The air was of the same texture. But there was an odd lack to this land, and it was difficult to determine. Perhaps it came of the horizon's curious vagueness. Perhaps from the blurring quality of the air, lucent and uncertain as water. Most strange, however, was the sky, a mesh of vast ripples and cross-ripples, and these refracted 1,000 shafts of colored light, rays which in midair wove wondrous lace, rainbow nets, and all the jewel hues. So as Turjan watched, there swept over him beams of claret, topaz, rich violet, radiant green. He now perceived that the colors of the flowers and the trees were but fleeting functions of the sky, for now the flowers were of salmon tint, and the trees a dreaming purple. The flowers deepened to copper, then with a suffusion of crimson, warmed through maroon to scarlet, and the trees had become sea blue. "The land none knows where," Turjan said to himself. "Have I been brought high, low, into pre-existence, or into the afterworld?" Toward the horizon, and thought to see a black curtain raising high into the murk, and this curtain encircled the land in all directions. The sound of galloping hoofs approached. He turned to find a black horse lunging breakneck along the bank of the pool. The rider was a young woman with black hair streaming wildly. She wore loose white breeches to the knee and a yellow cape flapping in the wind. One hand clutched the reins, the other flourished a sword. Turjan warily stepped aside, for her mouth was tight and white as if in anger, and her eyes glowed with a peculiar frenzy. The woman hauled back on the reins, wheeled her horse high around, charged Turjan, and struck out at him with her sword. Turjan jumped back and whipped free his own blade. When she lunged at him again, he fended off the blow and, leaning forward, touched the point to her arm and brought a drop of blood. She drew back startled, then up from her saddle she snatched a bow and flicked an arrow to the string. Turjan sprang forward, dodging the wild sweep of the sword, seized her around the waist, and dragged her to the ground. She fought with a crazy violence. He had no wish to kill her, and so struggled in a manner not entirely dignified. Finally, he held her helpless, her arms pinioned behind her back. "Quiet, vixen," said Turjan, "lest I lose patience and stun you." "Do as you please," the girl gasped. "Life and death are brothers." "Why do you seek to harm me?" demanded Turjan. "I have given you no offense." "You are evil, like all existence." Emotion ground the delicate fibers of her throat. "If power were mine, I would crush the universe to bloody gravel and stamp it into the ultimate muck." Turjan, in surprise, relaxed his grip, and she nearly broke loose, but he caught her again. "Tell me, where may I find Pandalume?" The girl stilled her exertion, twisted her head to stare at Turjan, then, "Search all Embellion. I will assist you not at all." If she were more amiable, thought Turjan, she would be a creature of remarkable beauty. "Tell me where I may find Pandalume," said Turjan, "else I find other uses for you." She was silent for a moment, her eyes blazing with madness. Then she spoke in a vibrant voice. "Pandalume dwells beside the stream, only a few paces distant." Turjan released her, but he took her sword and bow. "If I return these to you, will you go your own way in peace?" For a moment she glared. Then without words she mounted her horse and rode off through the trees. Turjan watched her disappear through the shafts of jewel colors, then went in the direction she had indicated. Soon he came to a long, low manse of red stone backed by dark trees. As he approached, the door swung open. Turjan halted in mid-stride. Nikki Holler. Hey, Nikki says, "Such great descriptions." Yeah, absolutely. And then Nothing says, "I took the 4 directions thing as almost a password for the spell." Yeah, that's how it seems. And that stuff's really cool. I get why if you were looking at this the first time and said, hey, we'd like to bring this into the game, you might think, yeah, maybe it might be a little bit too much to remember all that stuff, but there's just some great flavor there, and I'd love to investigate. Are there some ways to bring that flavor in that don't just add a whole bunch of, I don't want to call it busy work, and but just can bring some of that flavor back. Maybe just in the descriptions, but usually in the game, after a while, the first time you do something, you might want to describe it all, right? Like a fireball. First time your wizard casts a fireball, you want to just get all into it because it's a big moment. Third, fourth, sixth time, you're kind of like, okay, fireball, right? So maybe that here we're reading it for the first time, and so it seems amazing, but in a game situation where you're, okay, next week you're going to cast it again, the week after that you're going to cast it again, then maybe you go, okay, you end up just doing the kind of yada, yada, yada. All right, Violent Storm, yada, 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 4 directions in one, then you're here. Today's working man's drink is, what is this? Orange Mango Spindrift. It's not too bad. So he's landed where he wants to go, close to where he wanted to go, almost got run over by a horse, or a woman on a horse, and now he finds himself presumably at the house of, what is his name, Pandalume or Pandalume. I keep seeing it. I kind of want to say Pandalume, but I'm saying Pandalume, so I'll stick with Pandalume. But let me know if there's, I don't know that I saw, or I really didn't look for, I suppose, a pronunciation guide to whether it is supposed to be Pandalume or Pandalume. Enter, came a voice. Enter, Turjan of Miir. So Turjan wonderingly entered the manse of Pandalume. He found himself in a tapestried chamber, bare of furnishing save a single settee. No one came to greet him. A closed door stood at the opposite wall, and Turjan went to pass through, thinking perhaps it was expected of him. Halt, Turjan, spoke the voice. No one gaze on Pandalume. It is the law. Turjan, standing in the middle of the room, spoke to his unseen host. This is my mission, Pandalume, he said. For some time I have been striving to create humanity in my vats, yet always I fail, from ignorance of the agent that binds and orders the patterns. This master matrix must be known to you, therefore I come to you for guidance. Willingly will I aid you, said Pandalume. There is, however, another aspect involved. The universe is methodized by symmetry and balance. In every aspect of existence is this equipoise observed. Constantly, even in the trivial scope of our dealings, this equivalence must be maintained thus and thus. I agree to assist you. In return, you perform a service of equal value for me. When you have completed this small work, I will instruct and guide you to your complete satisfaction. Terrence says, I think that happens when magic is super common. When only a single spell is cast per session, descriptions are very welcome and fun. Yeah, I agree with you, Daniel. It's just unfortunate, or I don't say unfortunate, because when you're playing a magic user, part of the fun is gaining up levels, which means you get access to more spells. But having that means that eventually spells are going to become fairly common, only because you've gathered up all these resources over leveling up. You've gathered your scrolls, and you've got your spell books, you've got your items of different things that have spells stored on them. All this stuff that just tends to make magic. And that's assuming, and even that's just, hey, that's one magic user in the party. Maybe you've got two. Maybe you got a magic user and a cleric, whatever. So yeah, it's definitely, that concept sort of similar to, what distance makes the heart fonder, right? If it's rare, then it becomes this amazing thing. The more common it becomes, you lose some of that. I don't know if there's a way to balance that out in some way. I mean, sure, you could make magic. You could just mandate magic as something that is rare. But, that might be an interesting approach, but then you just have to figure out, well, how do you make magic users kind of have, what would be the arc of advancement for magic users if magic itself were really rare? All right, so I highlighted a couple of things here. I love this idea that you have to kind of match up, right? There's a balance to the universe, and so if you want something, you have to kind of give something up. I really think that's a concept I'd love to do more with, and many things in the game is this idea, you don't get something for free. You this thing that you want, it's powerful. Well, you're gonna have to do something in return for it, or you're gonna have to give something up, to learn that. I like it. It's really that consequence. Right? This is that kind of classic. The PC goes and says, "Hey man, teach me your most powerful spell, man." And then the NPC goes, "Well, I might teach you that spell, but first, you got to go on this quest for me." It's really just about the exactly what's happening here. Of course, it's with much nicer language. Okay, let's see where we were. Here we go. Turjan's going to ask him what is required of him. What may this service be? Inquired Turjan. A man lives in the island. A man lives in the land of Ascolace, not far from your castle Miir. About his neck hangs an amulet of carved blue stone. This you must take from him and bring to me. Turjan considered a moment. Very well, he said. I will do what I can. Who is the man? Pandalume answered in a soft voice. Prince Candive the Golden. Ah, exclaimed Turjan ruefully, or maybe I was too excited. Exclaimed Turjan ruefully. You have gone to no pains to make my task a pleasant one, but I will fulfill your requirements as best I can. Good, said Pandalume. Now I must instruct you. Candive wears this amulet hidden below his singlet. When an enemy appears, he takes it out to display on his chest. Such is the potency of the charm. No matter what else, do not gaze on this amulet, either before or after you take it, on pain of most hideous consequence. I understand, said Turjan. I will obey. Now there's a question I would ask, providing the answer will not involve me in an undertaking to bring the moon back to Earth, or recover an elixir you inadvertently spilled in the sea. Pandalume laughed loud. Ask on, he responded, and I will answer. Turjan put his question. As I approached your dwelling, a woman of insane fury wished to kill me. This I would not permit, and she departed in rage. Who is this woman, and why is she thus? Pandalume's voice was amused. I, too, he replied, have vats where I mold life into varied forms. This girl, Sais, I created, but I wrought carelessly, with a flaw in the synthesis. So she climbed from the vat with a warp in her brain. In this manner, what we hold to be beautiful seems to her loathsome and ugly, and what we find ugly is to her intolerably vile, in a degree that you and I cannot understand. She finds the world a bitter place, peopled with shapes of direst malevolence. So this is the answer, Turjan murmured. Pitiable wretch. Now, said Pandalume, you must be on your way to Cain. The auspices are good. In a moment, open this door, enter, and move to the pattern of runes on the floor. Turjan performed as he was bid. He found the next room to be circular and high-domed, with the varying lights of Embellion pouring down through sky transparencies. When he stood upon the pattern in the floor, Pandalume spoke again. Now close your eyes, for I must enter and touch you. Heed well, do not try to glimpse me. Turjan closed his eyes. Presently a step sounded behind him. Extend your hand, said the voice. Turjan did so and felt a hard object placed therein. When your mission is accomplished, crush this crystal, and at once you will find yourself in this room. A cold hand was laid on his shoulder. In an instant you will sleep. An instant you will sleep, said Pandalume. When you awake, you will be in the city Cain. All right. Another thing says, I think all the balanced talk was just a sales pitch. Hey, I sold. Nothing sold. I am sold on the balanced pitch. Daniel says, fewer spells but more powerful. Something like Wonders and Wickedness would level the spells that grow with the caster. I still have to read Wonders and Wickedness, Daniel, but I appreciate that shout out of it to get it push it up my reading queue, because I do like that. And Nikki Holler says, the balance content is great, like in Hyperborea, where if you summon a horse, someone somewhere loses a horse. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. Yes. I like that a lot. And there have been other spells like that, right? Where you're healing somebody, you're actually harming something else. I've seen it done where something else is far away. I've also seen it done where it's something nearby. I think if I was going to do that, I kind of like the nearby, because it forces you to look upon the consequences of your actions. I think another thing, Daniel, if I was going to have fewer spells, maybe more cross utility. Like instead of having a spell as Fireball, which is specifically just doing Fireball, but nothing else, maybe you have a spell that does stuff with fire. And eventually you can kind of use that spell to create a Fireball effect, but you could also use it to do a lot of stuff like lighting candles or doing things like that, or dancing lights, but it's all kind of one spell. Maybe that's how Wonders of Wickedness works. Not sure. Oh, Perkins says the Dying Earth is on my short list. Awesome. Let's see. Where were we? Here we go. The Hand Departed. Oh, well, one other thing I wanted to mention before I go on. I really like this idea of the Room of Runes. The kind of the crystal that returns you. So there's some nice stuff here. I don't know why I didn't highlight. Where did they see the pattern of runes on the floor that obviously has some kind of effect, but we don't know. It's definitely, it makes for an interesting thing that I could see as a part of a wizard's tower. Wizard's tower, but towers. Okay, here you're a wizard, and you're whatever level you have your wizard's tower. But this is something that's really interesting. If you could have these different rooms, does this pattern work for help Pandalume with something with all their spells? Is this specific room for spells of transportation? What does this room do? Do the runes move? Do you have to carve them in and keep them still? Like, there's a lot of kind of cool stuff that if you wanted to get into, the weeds more and kind of wizard domains or wizard manses or wizard towers. Well, what does that do? What does that do exactly? And I like the kind of magic object is a crystal that you crush and then it returns you. It's a cool magic item. Obviously, one use. The hand departed. A dimness came over Turjan as he stood awaiting the passage. The air had suddenly become full of sound, clattering, a tinkling of many small bells, music, voices. Turjan frowned, pursed his lips. A strange tumult for the austere home of Pandalume. A woman's voice sounded close by. Look, O sentinel, see the man-owl who closes his eyes to merriment. There was a man's laughter, suddenly hushed. Come, the fellow is bereft and possibly violent. Come. Turjan hesitated, then opened his eyes. It was night in white-walled Cain, and festival time. Orange lanterns floated in the air, moving as the breeze took them. From the balconies dangled flower chains and cages of blue fireflies. The streets surged with the wine-flushed populace, costumed in a multitude of bizarre modes. Here was a Melantine bargeman, here a warrior of Valderan's Green Legion, here another of ancient times wearing one of the old helmets. In a little cleared space, a garlanded courtesan of the Cacique literal danced the dance of the 14 silken movements to the music of flutes. In the shadow of a balcony, a girl barbarian of East Almery embraced a man blackened and in leather harness as a deodand of the forest. They were gay, these people of waning earth, feverishly merry, for infinite night was close at hand when the red sun should finally flicker and go black. Turjan melted into the throng. At a tavern he refreshed himself with biscuits and wine. Then he made for the palace of Candive the Golden. Let's see. Hey, Ian. Let's see. Paul says, I recommend the Appendix N podcast. Oh, I've not heard of that. I might have to check it out. Ian says, those summon monster spells have to come from somewhere. Maybe they were just sitting down to dinner. Yeah, well, I mean, on my, so one of my custom classes for my player in my game has this kind of dwarven cleric type, and something that these dwarven cleric types can do is summon elementals. But I really love the summon spell from Lamentation, so I borrowed that idea that they might come hostile to you. So there's always this bit of, did you pull that elemental from somewhere and he's not happy to be there, kind of thing. So far, the players have been lucky with those reaction rolls, but I can't wait for it's one time it's going to go south when they least expect it, because it hasn't happened yet. Perkins says, I had a patron give a magic scroll case that could transport a written message back to the patron with limited uses. Oh, cool. I've seen that. I feel like, was it Matt Colville had something like that in his game, where they these kind of magic messenger pouches where you could put a message in the pouch and I guess utter a word saying where to go and it would go. Pretty cool. I like it. The palace loomed before him, every window and balcony aglow with light. Among the lords of the city there was feasting and revelry. If Prince Candive were flushed with drink and unwary, reflected Turjan, the task should not be too difficult. Yet, entering boldly, he might be recognized, for he was known to many in Cain. So, uttering Fandal's mantle of stealth, he faded from the sight of all men. All right, so there we have it. Spell number 2 that he has cast. So first he cast the Violent Storm to take him to Pandalume, and now he has used his second spell, Mantle of Stealth, to get him stealthed, hiding in shadows, so to speak. Ian Boyd says, dignitary from the Ian from the Matt Colville comment, dignitary's pouch. Yeah, I think it was something like that. Yep. Diplomat's pouch. Yes, I think you're right. Through the arcade he slipped, into the grand salon, where the lords of Cain made merry like the throngs of the street. Turjan threaded the rainbow of silk, velour, sateen, watching the play with amusement. On a terrace, some stood looking into a sunken pool where a pair of captured deodans, their skins like oiled jet, paddled and glared. Others tossed darts at the spread-eagled body of a young Cobalt Mountain witch. In alcoves, beflowered girls offered synthetic love to wheezing old men, and elsewhere others lay stupefied by dream powders. So we're definitely seeing a lot of this decadence, kind of just a sort of thoughtless cruelty, right? They're just, I don't know what Deodans are, whether they're just a different culture of people or if they're some kind of other humanoid, but they're not being respected. And of course, they've taken a witch from the Cobalt Mountains and have tied her to, I guess, a wall or something, spread eagle, or just tossing darts at her for fun. Perkins says, going back to the Mantle of Stealth, a form of invisibility, perhaps limited in function. Yeah, I think we don't. We haven't been told what he can do or what he can't do. Is it like kind of classic invisibility, or at least classic the lower level of invisibility, where if you kind of touch anything, then you'll come out, or you make kind of any actions, you'll pop out, or whether it's more of a greater invisibility type. We don't know yet, but yeah, he seems to be in it, and then I wonder if we don't also know if it's covering up his sounds or whether it's just visual. Maybe we'll see later on. But so far, no one. But of course, everyone's in these kind of drunken stupors and reveries. So no one perhaps is paying enough attention, even if he was making noise or doing something. Nowhere did Turjan find Prince Khandiv. Through the palace he wandered, room after room, until at last in an upper chamber he came upon the tall, golden-bearded prince, lolling on a couch with a masked girl child who had green eyes and hair dyed pale green. Some intuition, or perhaps a charm, warned Khandiv when Turjan slipped through the purple hangings. Khandiv leapt to his feet. "Go," he ordered the girl. "Out of the room, quickly! Mischief moves somewhere near, and I must blast it with magic." The girl ran hastily from the chamber. Khandiv's hand stole to his throat and pulled forth the hidden amulet, but Turjan shielded his gaze with his hand. Khandiv uttered a powerful charm which loosened space free of all warp, so Turjan's spell was void, and he became visible. So there you go. So what the Mantle of Stealth had done was warp the space around him to make him invisible. Maybe kind of, sort of, I don't know, it's almost like the invisibility cloak Harry Potter. I guess maybe that's not even it. It seems like literally space. You've made like a little envelope of space and sort of put yourself into it. But whatever spell Khandiv used, he unwarped it, pushing Turjan back into visible space. "Turjan of Miir skulks through my palace," snarled Khandiv. "With ready death on my lips," spoke Turjan. "Turn your back, Khandiv, or I will speak a spell and run you through with my sword." Khandiv made as if to obey, but instead shouted the syllables, bringing the omnipotent sphere about him. "Now I call my guards, Turjan," announced Khandiv contemptuously, "and you shall be cast to the Deodans in the tank." Khandiv did not know the engraved band Turjan wore on his wrist, a most powerful rune, maintaining a field solvent of all magic. Still guarding his vision against the amulet, Turjan stepped through the sphere. Khandiv's great blue eyes bulged. "Call the guards," said Turjan. "They will find your body riddled by lines of fire." "Your body, Turjan!" cried the prince, babbling the spell. Instantly, the blazing wires of the excellent prismatic spray lashed from all directions at Turjan. Khandiv watched the furious rain with a wolfish grin, but his expression changed quickly to consternation. A finger's breadth from Turjan's skin, the fire darts dissolved into 1,000 gray puffs of smoke. "Turn your back, Khandiv," Turjan ordered. "Your magic is useless against Locadel's rune." But Khandiv took a step toward a spring on the wall. "Halt," cried Turjan. "One more step and the spray splits you 1,000-fold." Khandiv stopped short. In helpless rage, he turned his back, and Turjan, stepping forward quickly, reached over Khandiv's neck, seized the amulet, and raised it free. It crawled in his hand, and through the fingers were passed a glimpse of blue. A daze shook his brain, and for an instant he heard a murmur of avid voices. His vision clear, he backed away from Khandiv, stuffing the amulet into his pouch. Khandiv asked, "May I now turn about in safety?" "When you wish," responded Turjan, clasping his pouch. Khandiv, seeing Turjan occupied, negligently stepped to the wall and placed his hand on the spring. "Turjan," he said, "you are lost. Before you may utter a syllable, I will open the floor and drop you a great dark distance. Can your charm avail against this?" Turjan halted in mid-motion, fixed his eyes upon Khandiv's red and gold face. Then he dropped his eyes sheepishly. "Ah, Khandiv," he fretted, "you have outwitted me. If I return your amulet, may I go free?" "Toss the amulet at my feet," said Khandiv, gloating. "Also Lacodel's rune. Then I shall decide what mercy to grant you." "Even the rune?" Turjan asked, forcing a piteous note to his voice. "Or your life." Turjan reached into his pouch and grasped the crystal Pandalume had given him. He pulled it forth and held it against the pommel of his sword. Ho, Candive, he said, I have discerned your trick. You merely wish to frighten me into surrender. I defy you! Candive shrugged. Die, then. He pushed the spring. The floor jerked open, and Turjan disappeared into the gulf. But when Candive raced below to claim Turjan's body, he found no trace, and he spent the rest of the night in temper, brooding over wine. Well, he made it. So our man Turjan got in there, got the better of Candive. I really like that rune. Boy, what would you put the cost or the power of that rune? It's like a tiny little anti-magic field that surrounds you, but obviously doesn't prevent you from casting spells. I think I'd like to have one of those Lacadel's runes, I think. I suppose then, depending on how it worked, maybe it wouldn't work. It would mean that nobody could also heal you while you have Lacadel's rune in hand, and obviously it doesn't stop you from just falling to your death or being stabbed with blades or bashed in the head with clubs. But hey, that's a pretty good one. We also saw the excellent prismatic spray, but unfortunately it came to nothing in that instance. But he did give it a try. And oh, the poor prince, brooding over wine as Turjan manages to get the amulet and escape. Now, another thing says, I like how much oof this magic fight. I like how much of this magic fight is using magic items like magic users in OSR. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of you've got this, you've got that. I mean, I think it comes also from. I mean, the interesting thing here is, and of course, it's the story. But in this story, there's plenty of magic being called. Between everybody, Pandalume has used a couple spells. Pandalume's at least used one spell and given out one magic item. Let's see. Turjan has used 2 spells and used 2 items, the one that was given to him and then his rune. Candive has used 2 spells. So we're all talking 7 or 8 spells here in this short story. So it's not like in terms of these characters that there's just kind of, there's no magic going on. I mean, there's tons of magic going on, but because of this concept of Turjan only had 4 spells starting out the day, he's down to 1. We don't know how many Candive have, but that might have been his 2. He might not have had any more spells. Maybe he had 1 more. I don't know. I'm guessing probably Turjan's the superior magician to Candive, but we don't know. Let's see. Bandits Keep says, Daniel says, in D&D terms, probably like a ring of spell turning. Maybe. Turjan found himself in the circular room of Pandalume's manse. Embellion's many-colored light streamed through the sky windows upon his shoulder, sapphire blue, then yellow of marigolds, blood red. There was silence through the house. Turjan moved away from the rune in the floor, glancing uneasily to the door, fearful lest Pandalume, unaware of his presence, enter the room. Pandalume, he called. I have returned. There was no response. Deep quiet held the house. Turjan wished he were in the open air where the odor of sorcery was less strong. He looked at the doors. One led to the entrance hall, the other he knew not where. The door on the right must lead outside. He laid his hand on the latch and pulled it open, but he paused. Suppose he were mistaken, and Pandalume's form were revealed. Would it be wiser to wait here? A solution occurred to him. His back to the door, he swung it open. Pandalume, he called. A soft, intermittent sound came to his ears from behind, and seemed to hear a labored breath. Suddenly frightened, Turjan stepped back into the circular room and closed the door. He resigned himself to patience and sat on the floor. A gasping cry came from the next room. Turjan leapt to his feet. Turjan, you are there? Yes, I have returned with the amulet. Do this quickly, panted the voice. Guarding your sight, hang the amulet over your neck and enter. Turjan, speared by the urgency of the voice, closed his eyes and arranged the amulet on his chest. He groped to the door and flung it wide. Silence of a shocked intensity held an instant. Then came an appalling screech, so wild and demoniac that Turjan's brain sang. Mighty pinions buffeted the air. There was a hiss and the scrape of metal. Then, amidst muffled roaring, an icy wind bit Turjan's face. Another hiss, and all was quiet. My gratitude is yours, said the calm voice of Pandalume. Few times have I experienced such dire stress, and without your aid might not have repulsed that creature of hell. A hand lifted the amulet from Turjan's neck. After a moment of silence, Pandalume's voice sounded again from a distance. You may open your eyes. Turjan did so. He was in Pandalume's workroom, amidst much much else, he saw Vance like his own. I will not thank you, said Pandalume, but in order that a fitting symmetry be maintained, I perform a service for a service. I will not only guide your hands as you work among the vats, but also will I teach you other matters of value. In this fashion did Turjan enter his apprenticeship to Pandalume. Day and far into the opalescent Embellian night, he worked under Pandalume's unseen tutelage. He learned the secret of renewed youth, many spells of the ancients, and a strange abstract lore that Pandalume termed mathematics. Within this instrument, said Pandalume, resides the universe. Passive in itself and not of sorcery, it elucidates every problem, each phase of existence, all the secrets of time and space. Your spells and runes are built upon its power and codified according to a great underlying mosaic of magic. The design of this mosaic we cannot surmise. Our knowledge is didactic, empirical, arbitrary. Fandal glimpsed the pattern and so was able to formulate many of the spells which bear his name. I have endeavored through the ages to break the clouded glass, but so far my research has failed. He who discovers the pattern will know all of sorcery and be a man powerful beyond comprehension. He who controls the spice controls the universe. So we don't think we have seen yet. I don't know. We don't know what attacked Pandalume, but it seemed something not of this world. I think it was kind of cool, just as a narrative device that we don't get to see it, but we just get to feel it and hear it and experience it, kind of buffeting us, or maybe he was charging us, whatever he was doing, and then obviously the amulet able to destroy it. We don't know what it was, and I do like that. We also find out here that magic in terms of the Dying Earth is based on mathematics, or is mathematical. So Turjan applied himself to the study and learned many of the simpler routines. I find herein a wonderful beauty, he told Pandalume. This is no science, this is art, where equations fall away to elements like resolving chords, and where always prevails a symmetry, either explicit or multiplex, but always of crystalline serenity. In spite of these other studies, Turjan spent most of his time at the vats, and under Pandalume's guidance achieved the mastery he sought. As a recreation, he formed a girl of exotic design, whom he named Floriel. The hair of the girl he had found with Condive on the night of the festival had fixed in his mind, and he gave his creature pale green hair. She had skin of creamy tan and wide emerald eyes. Turjan was intoxicated with delight when he brought her wet and perfect from the vat. She learned quickly and soon knew how to speak with Turjan. She was one of the dreamy and wistful habit, caring for little but wandering among the flowers of the meadow, or sitting silently by the river, yet she was a pleasant creature, and her gentle manners amused Turjan. But one day the black-haired Sais came riding past on her horse, steely-eyed, slashing at flowers with her sword. The innocent Floriel wandered by into Sais, exclaiming, Green-eyed woman, your aspect horrifies me. It is death for you. Cut her down as she had the flowers in her path. Turjan, hearing the hooves, came from the workroom in time to witness the swordplay. He paled in rage, and a spell of twisting torment rose to his lips. Then Sais looked at him and cursed him. And in the pale face and dark eyes he saw her misery and the spirit that caused her to defy her fate and hold to her life. Many emotions fought in him, but at last he permitted Sais to ride on. He buried Floriel by the riverbank and tried to forget her in intense study. A few days later he raised his head from work. Pandalume, are you near? What do you wish, Turjan? You mentioned that when you made Sais, a flaw warped her brain. Now I would create one like her, of the same intensity, yet sound of mind and spirit. As you will, replied Pandalume indifferently, and gave Turjan the pattern. So Turjan built a sister to Sais, and day by day watched the same slender body and the same proud features take form. When her time came, she sat up in her vat, eyes glowing with joyful life. Turjan was breathless in haste to help her forth. She stood before him, wet and naked, a twin to Sais. But where the face of Sais was racked by hate, here dwelt peace and merriment. Where the eyes of Sais glowed with fury, here shone the stars of imagination. Turjan stood wondering at the perfection of his own creation. Your name shall be Tsane, said he, and already I know that you will be part of my life. He abandoned all else to teach Tsane, and she learned with marvelous speed. Let's see, Perkins says, we got to see a bit of the reason magic works and remains mysterious. Yep, we get a little taste. We don't exactly know what part of mathematics or how mathematics plays in or how mathematics gets converted to magic. But yeah, it's kind of a cool, and I think it also plays into the Dying Earth that, technology when it comes advanced enough becomes magic, that whole kind of thing. So it sort of plays into that. I really like the idea of people being these kind of patterns, almost like in those, like in a player piano or something. You could just feed the pattern in and out something comes. So to create another one of this type, Turjan just got the pattern from Pandalume. It'd be really neat to take that into one. I'd love to know, and it'd be something that if you were going to take some of the stuff and want to bring that in your game, what does a pattern look like? How is it expressed? Is it like in a scroll? How does one create a pattern? If you wanted to create a pattern for a living thing, like if you wanted to clone yourself, kind of like the clone spell or something similar like that, like what does that look like? How does one make a pattern of something? How would one make a pattern of themselves? Could you make a pattern of yourself? Would you need somebody else to do it? And then, those patterns become valuable, because if Pandalume had said, sorry, that pattern burned in a fire, he'd be out of luck. That pattern is, in some ways, priceless. Presently, when we return to Earth, he told her, to my home beside a great river in the green land of Ascalais. Is the sky of Earth filled with colors? She inquired. No, he replied. The sky of Earth is a fathomless dark blue, and an ancient red sun rides across the sky. When night falls, the stars appear in patterns that I will teach you. And Belion is beautiful, but Earth is wide, and the horizons extend far off into mystery. As soon as Pandalume wills, we return to Earth. Sane loved to swim in the river, and sometimes Turjan came down to splash her and toss rocks in the water while he dreamed. Against Sais he had warned her, and she had promised to be wary. But one day, as Turjan made preparations for departure, she wandered far afield through the meadows, mindful only of the colors at play in the sky, the majesty of the tall blurred trees, the changing flowers at her feet. She looked on the world with a wonder that is only for those new from the Vance. Across several low hills she wandered, and through a dark forest where she found a cold brook. She drank and sauntered along the bank, and presently came upon a small dwelling. The door being opened, Sane looked to see who might be lived there, but the house was vacant, and the only furnishings were a neat pallet of grass, a table with a basket of nuts, a shelf with a few articles of wood, and pewter. Sane turned to go on her way, but at this moment she heard the ominous thud of hooves sweeping close like fate. The black horse slid to a stop before her. Sane shrank back in the doorway, all Turjan's warnings returning to her mind. But Sais had dismounted and came forward with her sword ready. As she raised to strike, their eyes met, and Sais halted in wonder. It was a sight to excite the brain. The beautiful twins were in the same white waist-high breeches, with the same intense eyes and careless hair, the same slim, pale bodies, the one wearing on her face hate for every atom of the universe, the other a gay exuberance. Sais found her voice. How is this, witch? You bear my semblance, yet you are not me. Or has the boon of madness come at last to dim my sight of the world? Sane shook her head. I am Sane. You are my twin, Sais, my sister. For this I must love you, and you must love me. Love? I love nothing. I will kill you, and so make the world better by one less evil. She raised her sword again. No, cried Sane in anguish. Why do you wish to harm me? I have done no wrong. You do wrong by existing, and you offend me by coming to mock my own hideous mold. Sane laughed. Hideous? No, I am beautiful, for Turjan says so. Therefore you are beautiful too. Sais's face was like marble. You make sport of me. Never. You are indeed very beautiful. Sais dropped the point of her sword to the ground. Her face relaxed in thought. Beauty? What is beauty? Can it be that I am blind, that a fiend distorts my vision? Tell me, how does one see beauty? I don't know, said Sane. It seems very plain to me. Is not the play of colors across the sky beautiful? Sais looked up in astonishment. The harsh glarings? They are either angry or dreary, in either case detestable. See how delicate are the flowers, fragile and charming. They are parasites. They smell vilely. Sane was puzzled. I do not know how to explain beauty. You seem to find joy in nothing. Does nothing give you satisfaction? Only killing and destruction. So these must be beautiful. Sane frowned. I would term these evil concepts. Do you believe so? I am sure of it. Sais considered. How could I know how to act? I have been certain, and now you tell me that I do evil. Sane shrugged. I have lived little, and I am not wise. Yet I know that everyone is entitled to life. Turjan could explain to you easily. Who is Turjan? Inquired Sais. He is a very good man, replied Sane, and I love him greatly. Soon we go to Earth, where the sky is vast and deep and of dark blue. Earth. If I went to Earth, could I also find beauty and love? That may be, for you have a brain to understand beauty, and beauty of your own to attract love. Then I kill no more, regardless of what wickedness I see. I will ask Pandalume to send me to Earth. Sayin stepped forward, put her arm around Sais, and kissed her. You are my sister, and I will love you. Sais's face froze. Rend, stab, bite, said her brain, but a deeper surge welled up from her flowing blood, from every cell of her body, to suffuse her with a golden flush of pleasure. She smiled. Then, I love you, my sister. I kill no more, and I will find and know beauty on earth or die. Sais mounted her horse and set out for earth, seeking love and beauty. Sayin stood in the doorway, watching her sister ride off through the colors. Behind her came a shout, and Turjan approached. Sayin, has that frenzied witch harmed you? He did not wait for a reply. Enough! I kill her with a spell, that she may wreak no more pain. He turned to voice a terrible charm of fire, but Sayin put her hand to his mouth. No, Turjan, you must not. She has promised to kill no more. She goes to earth, seeking what she may not find in Embellion. So Turjan and Sayin watched Sais disappear across the many-colored meadow. Turjan, spoke Sayin, what is your wish? When we come to earth, will you find me a black horse like that of Sais? Indeed, said Turjan, laughing, as they started back to the house of Pandalume. Bum, bum, bum. End of Turjan of Miir. Cool. We got through just about a bit of an hour. See, I got some stuff here in the chat. Nothing says, oops, forgot to tell you about the murderer running around. Turjan did explain to her that, but she was, she's naive. She's like a child. You can tell a child things, but they don't necessarily take it to heart. And she did not take to heart that there was a literal murderer running around. But not only murderer, but sort of opposing twin. Let's see. Daniel says, Fireball, a train leaves Chicago at 8 a.m. going 50 miles an hour. A second train leaves Dallas at 10 p.m. How much does a bagel sandwich cost in New York? That's very true. That would be funny. My daughter would definitely love if you could do magic via word problem. I forget what they call word problems now. They call them something else. I wish I could remember because, my daughter's in second grade, so she's learning math, kind of the new, I don't want to say I don't even call it the new method anymore, but it's just kind of different. It's really interesting. But they have a different word for word problems. But yeah, that would be good. So what do we think of Turjan? I mean, it's a fun story. It's a little bit, there's definitely a little bit of an arc there. It's got a little bit of that kind of, I don't want to say kind of Twilight Zone sort of thing, something you might find in Twilight Zone or classic Star Trek. You have the being that sees only certain things, and the other one, and I could easily see in a Star Trek type episode, it's Kirk runs across Sais, and then of course there'd be something kind of sexual in it, but then he explains to her how he sees the beauty in space, and then this creature now sees it, that she doesn't just have to kill and destroy anymore, and so she can go off into the universe and find things of beauty. I could totally see it in that kind of vein, just with the sort of absolutes kind of thing. Paul Drew says short story. It is just short story. Yeah, all the Dying Earth, this book is all short stories. So it is full of shorts. This one, and like I said, in this printing, it is the second story, I think, or the second. Yeah, it's the second story. I think originally it was the first story. Maybe they wanted to put it together so that you get Turjan and Sais right next to each other. Not sure. I really like the things about magic that we got in here. I think, he's a very talented writer. They're beautiful descriptions. I mean, all the narrative is great. I think to kind of pull in sort of the D&D kind of OSR perspective, it's great to see some of these spells, kind of how they originated. I think when you read these, I think you get a much different, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning. I think that, not that, look, Vance magic isn't going to be for everybody. I think sometimes it gets a bad rap. I think when you read this, a lot of the folks who look at this and just Vance magic and we just kind of say, oh, it's terrible, it doesn't make any sense or whatever, read the story, read the story. At least in terms of the story, does it make sense? If you came into it thinking Vance magic stinks, I don't know, like, does it make sense? I mean, but of course, when you transfer it to a game, you have to make a lot of allowances. And does the game allow you situations to really deploy spells the way they are deployed here? Because here they are the real game changers. The whole thing, Turjan versus that prince, it's all, spell, counter spell, item, counter item, right? That's really boom, 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 boom. So even though, they don't have a huge variety, the ones they have, they really are pushing against each other. In terms of a game, could we figure out a way in our games to get some of that going. And of course, in the games, it's different because you're not just, Turjan's essentially playing solo. He's all by himself. So he's the sole person in the game. Whereas, okay, you've got the magic user with kind of fancied magic, but you have to balance it against the fact that he's not alone. And he's not necessarily the man in charge, right? You're amongst 3, 4, 5 different people. So can we fold all this in a way to give them some of that same energy where it feels like these spells are very potent and powerful without it being just, that's what everybody's doing? Because in at least in this story, you can infer that the people of power are the people who have magic. The prince has got magic. Pandalume has magic. Turjan has magic. They're running the show. Everybody else is kind of doing things just because you definitely would think that there's a hierarchy to, similar to Harry Potter, in that you have sort of mages or the wizards, witches, whatever, magic users at the top, and everyone else is down below somewhere. So what do you do in a game where you've got, a Turjan style magician, but he's next to a Conan style character. Let's see. Daniel says, I don't think she is naive. She doesn't believe in that absolute evil and believes there can be good in anyone. The opposite. I mean, I think the naivete to me, Daniel, wasn't so much in that approach, though. I think that, I feel like that is a bit of a naive thing. Maybe not the absolute evil, but I feel like they're naive in just the way it's kind of just, it's sort of childlike, which she is, right? Like Turjan says, she sees the world in the way that only one can see it who's come from the vats, basically looking at it fresh. And that's kind of what I mean by naive. And also just naive in the fact that she's not paying attention. Just like, when you're an adult, or you're a mature person, or you're ready for a world that is evil in it, you try to be aware of it, right? You're looking when you cross the street, because even if your logic tells you that this is a one-way street and you looked one way, you look the other way because you never know when some moron's traveling the wrong way up the street, right? She doesn't have that yet. She's still in that innocent kind of mode. And I think that's kind of the naivety that I'm thinking of. Perkins says it's weird, episodic. It is something you would see in a magazine. Yeah, I don't know if I don't think these were originally in magazines, were they? I don't think so. But yeah, I think that he was basically taking a lot of short stories. I mean, it's in the time, so you're talking 1950, Dying Earth comes out. So if you look at the way a lot of the science fiction and fantasy landscape it was kind of short story driven. Even if they just didn't get published in magazines specifically, there was a lot of short stories. Not to say that Tolkien was the first to do it, but the idea of making just a massive novel and put it out there is kind of rare, I would think. I don't know if Tolkien's the first. He's probably not. Someone will say that there are stories. I think there are stories and novels that go back, but in terms of kind of in popular culture, popular circles, really, the Lord of the Rings, which comes out after this, because I think Lord of the Rings comes out in the mid-50s. I want to say, I guess he already had The Hobbit. So maybe the kind of Hobbits out there, but I think it's rare to have this just big, like, now we think of it and that's kind of the norm is, not even one big novel, but it's let's have 3, let's have 8, let's have 12. But I think in this time frame, the kind of pulp world, sword and sorcery world was dominated by short stories. Conan, Lovecraft, all the ones that are in all those magazines and everything was all short story based. So I get the wanting to, or just the draw to creating a similar format. Daniel says Lord of the Rings was originally 6 books. I think it was actually, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of back and forth, because at one point, kind of an interesting aside, Tolkien actually originally almost lost his publisher because he wanted to get the Silmarillion and the entire Lord of the Rings out in one shot. I don't know if he would then have split it into a bunch of books and it would have been one series, or if he wanted it in one massive Bible-like tome. I know in the books they then split it and you have, Fellowship, whatever. I don't know when that came out, but yeah, it was massive, and he actually originally intended to be even more massive. But I think short stories were just where a lot of folks were operating. All right, well, I'm glad we made it through. So I will put this in various places, and I'll remind folks, but we will go. So the second story, so I'm really happy that I wasn't sure if we would be able to get through the whole story or how that would work in the hour, but I'm really happy that we made it through this. I do not expect that every story will fit fairly neatly in more or less an hour, because they're going to be of different lengths and there's going to be different things to discuss. We will do Mazirian the Magician next. So mark this one down. You've got the rest of February into March to read Mazirian the Magician. That'll be the next story that we'll go through. And I'll see folks on the flip side. I don't think I have any other programming notes for now, so I will let all of you go. Have a great day, night, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody, and I'll talk to you later.